Wow, absolute wow. You had plenty of questions to ask us about the furlough video that we did for you. Well, this video is designed to answer those very questions, so go and check it out. Hi everyone, my name is Simon Misiewicz from Optimise Accountants, and I'm very pleased again to bring back to the fore Cheryl Willey from Peak HR. You may recall that we did a video which is appearing right now in front of you on the 27th of March, where we talked about furlough and coronavirus. And furlough, for anyone listening, do watch that video because it talks about the process of furlough, what furlough is all about. So we're not going to go into detail about that. But there were some really interesting questions that came out of that video. And Cheryl and I just thought, well, let's give some more feedback for you and answer those questions in this video. So Cheryl, welcome back. And how have you been since we last spoke?
Busy, really busy. Lots of my clients have got lots of questions about the furlough scheme, so we've been dealing with that. And of course, now coming out the other end of it as well, we're starting to see a lot of future planning going on. So yeah, it's been interesting times. So thanks for having me back.
And since we did that video, there's a big change that came out from the date of furlough, when you could put someone on leave and whether that person would be eligible for furlough. Do you want to give those the first date that was announced and now this change date and what that really means?
Yeah, so initially we knew that people were eligible to go on the furlough scheme if they were in employment on the 28th of February. That left a significant number of people who had changed jobs in March that wouldn't be eligible to access the furlough scheme. But then later on, the Chancellor actually changed that date to the 19th of March. So people who had changed jobs within March could access the scheme. But there was a critical detail in that, which meant that you had to have been paid. So there had to have been an RTI submission made by your employer to the HMRC by the 19th of March. So of course, if people are monthly paid and get paid at the end of the month, it's probably likely that that RTI submission hadn't actually been done by the 19th of March. It was probably going to be done in those 10, 12 days after that point. But those on weekly pay will probably have seen an RTI submission done for them, so probably could have accessed the scheme.
Okay. And talking about that, because obviously there are examples, aren't there, whereby someone has indeed left their job in February, at the end of February, let's say, not going to be paid till the end of March, which then leaves them in limbo. From an employee perspective, are they just left out on a limb if the new employee says, well, actually, we're terminating your contract? And can the employer just say, actually, we're ripping up the contract?
They can, unfortunately, they can dismiss if they're not able to access the furlough scheme. The only other thing that they can do is lay you off, and that is without pay anyway. However, we know that employment rights continue to accrue. Holiday will continue to accrue, so there will still be costs for the business, and depending on why they recruited you, if it was for additional staff, if their business has taken a reduction, they probably don't need you. They are actually within their rights to dismiss you.
And just a bit more detail before we go into the Q&A from the last video. I've picked up personally myself, when you're looking at how much you can claim, it is the lower of £2,500 or 80% of the wages. That is right, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
And my other understanding, which is maybe in addition to this 2,500 or 80%, is that you can claim for the pension contributions made to that employee, as well as the employer's national insurance as well. Is that right, or is that part of the 80% and 2,500 limit?
No, that's correct. So national insurance contributions, auto enrolment contributions, they can be claimed on top of the 80% or the 2,500. So the auto enrolment contributions will only be at the government level. So if you pay additional to that, you can't claim that additional pay. You can only claim the government's minimums. But yes, they are on top of the levels that we know exist.
Okay. And I think the one thing to bear in mind is if people do pay over and above that 2,500 limit, that would remain a cost to the employer.
Yes, it would. Yeah, that can't be claimed back.
Okay, I think that's a good update from where we were. So thank you ever so much for sharing your insights onto that. So let's get into the questions that was left on the previous video, which we'll go through now. And Zoom, I'm not sure if that's their real name, but you never know. So Zoom has asked, so the essential key workers will have to pick up the tab again for non-essentials. I rather think what they're saying here is that non-essential staff are being asked to work, and non-essential staff have got this holiday. I'm not sure if that's fairer or not, but I'm not an essential worker, I've got to be honest. I'm probably doing 10, 11 hours a day. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, there will be many people that aren't essential workers that are still working. We know that 50%, I think stats show that 50% of the workforce, of the UK workforce, are actually working from home. So key workers, we know, aren't working from home. They are in the hospitals, in the care environments, in the supermarkets, etc., etc. But we know that 50% of the workforce, UK workforce, is actually at home as well. So yes, there are significant numbers that have been furloughed. I do understand that, but there's still an awful lot of people out there working as well. Yeah, that's my thoughts on it as well. Yeah.
And another question was M Howard 181, who said, my employers furloughed me. I was 80% wages. They have just asked me to take forced holiday on week 3. So I guess they was meant to be working on, but been put on furlough, but now the employers asked them to have holiday instead. This will mean that he would receive 100% of the wages for that 3rd week. Is this legal? And if it is, can employers simply change and force people to do that?
In a short, yes, employers can force employees to take holiday, but what I would suggest is that you look at your contracts of employment and also look at any annual leave or holiday policies that may exist in your staff handbook to make extra sure what your employer's stance is on that. But in short, yes, it is a legal thing to do, yes.
I mean, going from your own personal experiences, the things that you've been having coming into your office, Cheryl, has there been instances whereby employers and employees haven't had the correct formal conversations taking place and it's just done on a whim?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. We see that with small organisations, and that's why I actually have a job, because lots of small organisations need this kind of advice. But yeah, these are changes to contracts. You know, these are legal processes that we're going through, and they do need to be done properly and followed up properly in writing as well. So yeah, they shouldn't be done on a whim.
It's interesting on that side, what exposure people might be left into.
Absolutely.
Isra has said, so Isra G. Glez said, I'm an agency worker on a 0 hours contract. I guess we cannot force employment companies to apply for us on the job retention scheme, leaving a lot of people out of the scheme and vulnerable. Is that something that you're aware of, and what rights do people have on 0 hour contracts?
Well, we know that 0 hours contracts, those on 0 hours contracts are eligible for the scheme, so they can access the scheme. But employers, it is down to the employer as to whether they put their employees on furlough or not. So the employees can't actually force their employers to do that. And if the agency or any employer isn't willing to do that, then sadly that leaves the 0 hours without access to that scheme.
I mean, one of the things I'm assuming here is the reason for that is because employers would have to initially pay their employees, and then the employers would have to put a claim into the government, which might take some time to get them, which could cause them financial issues as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, the agencies get paid by their clients, and if they've not got people out, they've not got that money coming in. And I know that's the same for many organisations. But of course, we know, we talked about this last time, that organisations are able to access those loans, and we know that there's a new loan scheme coming out, the bounce back loans as well, that went live this week. So those loans are there to kind of tide it over. But again, there's still there's no reason that the employer can be forced into accessing the scheme.
Right. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Samuel J has said, hello, I work 40 hours a week at this company through an agency, again, another agency, since last October. The agency asked us to stop working on the 17th of March due to coronavirus. Do I qualify for furloughed by the agency? Which I guess is the same answer from the zero-hour contract one, really.
Well, yes, if he was working on the 17th of March, then yes, he meets the criteria, but he doesn't. There's no obligation on the agency to furlough him.
Yeah. And then SC Bensman said, hello, if I have been furloughed for the 12-week period, can your employer at any point in time change their minds and ask you to require you for you to come back to work?
Yes, absolutely. So you are still employed, you are still, it's a key part of the furlough scheme that you should always remain available to work. We know that you can't do any work, but if circumstances for your employer change throughout that 12-week period, yes, they can ask you to come back to work, and the furlough ends at that point.
Right, okay. And I guess coupled with that, they've said, secondly, can you work for another company during your furlough period, which I guess people are saying, well, if I'm only getting 80% of my wages, can I supplement my income by working in Sainsbury's or one of these other, or even as a charity worker? So let's tackle that point. Can someone go on and get a second job? And if they can or cannot, could they also go to do some charitable work?
Yes, so part of the scheme says that they can take up a secondary job, but this comes back to a contractual issue between you and your employer. So lots of contracts that I see actually prevent an employee taking a second job. And we usually find that this is for reasons of competition between the marketplaces. However, the employer is probably not that worried. If you want to take a job in Tesco or Asda, we know that they've been recruiting like mad over the last few weeks, but it's something that although the scheme says that you can do it, be careful not to breach your contract of employment if your contract of employment says you cannot take up other employment. So it might be worth just checking the contract and then having a conversation with your employer about that.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Tamzin has said, if I claimed universal credit from the end of March, but my employer is saying that they might put me through furlough and therefore get the pay for it, would I be eligible for furlough or not?
You would be eligible for furlough from the employment aspect of it. You would have to speak to the benefits office, Job Centre Plus, around what you do about the universal credit payments at that point. But yes, you are eligible for the furlough scheme.
That's positive news for Tamsin there. Okay, so we've got another one. Premier Gurung has said, hi there, is furlough scheme available for temporary staff on 6 to 12 months contract? And again, I guess it does depend on the contract and does depend on the employer. So I think we've covered that already. Brian has also a similar question. Started a new job on the 2nd of March, so I'm not entitled to furlough payment. Thank you very much, government. Well, I think what we heard from the outset is that they did change the dates from the 28th of February until, which date was it, Sarah?
19th of March.
19th of March, but it does depend on whether you got paid during that period to decide if you can be furloughed or not. So, Brian, you may be in the unfortunate position where you will not get that furlough money. So, yes, I can understand your angst on that. Monica has asked a question. My PAYE full-time contract started in January 2020. I'm fit and well, yet my contract was terminated on the 31st of March 2020. I was offered furlough and accepted it informally. Should I have been formally offered furlough? The company is still open and operating, albeit at a reduction, on a reduced function, I guess.
Okay, so we've said a few times that there's no obligation on your employer to put you on the furlough scheme. you should, if you were going to be placed on furlough, then yes, it should have been done formally. We talked about formal changes to contracts and paperwork and things like that a few questions ago. There is, however, your employer may actually have reassessed what they need going forward. We know that businesses are kind of taking a step back in terms of what they actually need in terms of forecasting for the future. So they may just have actually realised that they don't actually need that role anymore. And unfortunately, that probably is why your contract has been ended. It's very unfortunate, but it's very possible that that's been a legitimate reason for doing that.
Right. Okay. And Charlie's finally asked the question. I was hired on the 24th of February, but received my February pay on the 25th of March. Am I still eligible as I was hired before the 28th of February, but just did not receive my first pay until the end of March? I guess your answer is going to be no, they're not eligible for furlough because they didn't receive their pay before or on 19th of March.
So if they were paid on the 25th, if they were paid on the 25th of February, they're eligible. Have I understood?
25th of March, sorry.
Sorry, then yeah, no, of course, no, right. No, they're not eligible, sorry.
So from that perspective, is it a negotiation for the employee to say, well, I still want to work with you, but take me on at a later point in time? But in the meantime, would they have to apply for things like universal credits?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had some clients that have that kind of ended the contract with these individuals, and so that they can go off and find other employment or get universal credit, but they absolutely have promised to take them back when things change and they can reopen again. So yes, that's entirely possible. There's nothing to say that they have to end their employment. You know, if they're on layoff, they can still apply for universal credit anyway, because they won't be earning any money.
Now, is there a formal requirement? So let's imagine that someone does terminate you at the end of March, for an example, hadn't paid you until after March, terminate your contract, but say, well, we'll take you on the 1st of June, as an example. Is it better for an employee to have that documented and signed, because that then becomes a new contract?
Yes, it would be better for the employee to have that in writing, so that they've got something that they can rely on. However, nothing is set in stone, and of course, offers can still be revoked at that point. But yes, the more that you get in writing in these circumstances, the better.
Fantastic. I think, Cheryl, thank you ever so much for your time today. It's been really good insights for the Q&A. Are there any kind of other points that we've missed off that you think is important for both the employee side as well as the employer side?
Well, future planning is the big thing. I mentioned earlier that this is what I'm doing with some of my clients now, is kind of looking and forecasting at what their business is likely to be doing for the rest of this year and into next year as well. So I would encourage everybody to do that, start that process now. If we don't quite know what's going to happen to the furlough scheme in July. It's possible that it's going to be extended, but maybe at a lower rate of pay. But it's important, if you think that you may need to make redundancies, it's important to make sure that you can probably get that done now, because anybody working out their notice period can do so under the furlough scheme. So you as the employer can be claiming back 80% of the pay that you're dishing out as notice pay.
Right, okay. And obviously there's been a change in circumstances, the way that employers and employees work. Obviously people are working from home. Are there any health and safety issues? I appreciate that the government have been saying, well, just send everyone working from home if you can, because we want this separation of people. But are there any health and safety issues that you could think of from an employer's liability perspective?
Yeah, there are. I mean, the health and safety executive are pretty lenient about temporary working from home arrangements, but it's always better to make sure that you belt and braces, anything with health and safety, is get your risk assessments done now. And that is always, that's the key with everything like this, is to risk assess. So do a home working risk assessment, make sure that they've got the relevant equipment that they need, they've got a decent setup, because they won't face any particular issues immediately. But if you're working at home in an unfit workstation for a prolonged period of time, musculoskeletal issues will crop up over that period of time. So better that you can ward that off now than having to try and backtrack and deal with it later on. So yeah, risk assessments and things like that are key at the moment.
Great. Okay. Cheryl, again, I just want to say thank you ever so much for Cheryl Willie from Peak HR. We will see her again next month as we explore more HR issues. Maybe not be on coronavirus, but I'm sure there'll be an update on that section as well. But we will be talking about the cost of HR and the finances issues of getting HR recruitment and indeed letting people go incorrectly, which will cost you as a business owner. So Cheryl, thank you ever so much for today.
Thank you.
Well, why not book a call with me, Simon Misiewicz, your Finance Tax Director, for at least an hour to understand how we can help you grow your business without paying the tax.